Hello and welcome to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, the CPA's podcast looking at some of the most vital issues facing parliaments and parliamentarians today. In this episode, we looked at disability rights and disability campaigning. We spoke with two of the most vital voices in disability advocacy today. Abia Akram is a disability advocate from Pakistan and campaign ambassador for Equal World from Sightsavers. Her work focuses on fighting for the rights of women, girls, and young people with disabilities. Dr. Datuk Adiba Radzi is a community activist, former senator, former Paralympian, and journalist from Malaysia. This episode is also taking place as part of the CPA's first annual campaign. This year's campaign is focusing on advocating for parliaments to enshrine disability rights in law. This includes ratification, domestication, and implementation of countries' responsibilities under the UN CRPD. As well as advocacy, the CPA is creating two new tools which will support parliaments in conducting their own disability plans and disability legislation. Thank you, Abia Akram, for joining me on this podcast. You have many decades of experience in disability advocacy. So my first question was, how did you first become involved in disability campaigning?
Thank you. Thank you so much. When I started my work back in 1997, it was really different to talk from the human rights perspective because the medical charity based approach was there. So when I started the campaign work and advocated for the rights of persons with disability, I talk about the billions of persons with disability who are facing the discrimination, the challenges. And from my personal experience and the experiences of those women and girls with disability, given me that engagement, like I really need to talk about their rights, the perspective from the human rights approach.
It's interesting that you've highlighted there the kind of intersectional nature of your work for fighting for disability rights. What informs your approach, and what other intersections with disability do you think that campaigners, parliamentarians, governments, activists should consider?
Yeah, being a person with disability, then coming from the global south, then from the young people, and then having disability and gender, and all those kind of intersectionalities are bringing them 4 times greater than the non-disabled people, the discrimination and the stereotypes they are facing. So this is critically important to highlight how you are talking from the development discourse or the emergency or the humanitarian response. You really need to focus on the inclusion and the intersectionality of very diverse kind of groups. So data is critically important, like how you are disaggregating the data, what kind of information, and being parliamentarians, it's important to know there is a huge gap and the systematic barriers that are existing to include the voices of persons with disability in the overall development, and that have given Sightsavers and the Equal World campaign the real insight to talk about the intersectionality approach and engaging more diversified groups in the conversation.
So you mentioned there as well the Equal World campaign of Sightsavers. You're a campaign ambassador for that campaign. So could you just introduce our listeners to what this is, what it's trying to achieve, and maybe what kind of impacts you've seen so far in this work?
The Equal World campaign is a very unique place that is having, because this is talking from the experiences of those persons with disabilities. We talk about the leadership role, we talk about engagement of women with disability in the CRPD committee, we talk from the legislation to the implementation of the policies like in Bangladesh and other countries. We also talk about the young people with disabilities engagement with the Secretary General's commitment for the Pact for the Future, how important it is to see at all levels their participation. So this Equal World campaign is creating the change globally and seeing that those voices are included, but at the same time have the systematic response from the government, from the state departments, and from the engagements of the young people with disabilities.
So what about bringing along the communities that you're fighting alongside? How do you ensure that you're not just say, advocating on someone's behalf, but bringing them along with you in this process?
We are creating the spaces. It's a sustainable spaces to lead the whole movement. It's not only talking about their challenges, it's about us. Nothing about us without us, and we are talking about leaving no one behind. So that agenda, how important through the accountability mechanisms, through the data segregation, and also the right-based approach. If you have all these aligned, then you will be able to see the impact on the communities.
Right, and your work has focused on international human rights frameworks, but also in your own country of Pakistan specifically. At the CPA, we're pushing for parliaments to implement disability acts as part of our campaign for this year. What is the legislative situation like in Pakistan, and have you seen a change over the years?
Yeah, in Pakistan, we have the first ever legislation back in 2020 with the support from the FCDO and all the engagements of the parliamentary. But at the same time, we need the implementations of those policies. And that need steering groups, committees within the government, within the organizations representative of persons with disability, so we can have more, visible changes and the implementation of those laws. So for that, we need a sustained budgetary allocations as well, because we have been witnessing with the global agenda and the cuts on the funding, it's impacting a lot to women and girls with disability who are facing gender-based violence, sexual harassment. So how we increase that portion of the community for persons with disability to be more visible and have that support.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about implementation as well, and you've said in the past, if policies don't have teeth, then change can't happen. So why do you think that there's often this gap between policies on paper and their implementation in the real world? Is it?
Yeah, it's important that teeth, in a sense, like they will be people that who are working closely with the government and sitting in the parliament to talk about their own rights and how the rules and regulations are aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and also have that kind of level of engagement. So Sightsavers, like the way they are working, it's more strategically engaging with the government officials and sitting with them to talk about those implementation plans. Because if you have only the recommendations that are in the papers, that will not make any change. So how systematically we are removing those barriers, what kind of like policies at that same time at the grassroots level, and the engagement mechanisms are in place to address that.
And one thing we were talking about earlier actually as well was data collection, and where issues might arise even in kind of ascertaining the number of people with disabilities in a country. What are some of these barriers, and how do you think governments should go about overcoming these?
Yeah, data segregation, we need a proper system. Like in the census, we include the Washington set of group of questions that needs to be trained, the whole numerators and the understanding how to collect that data, and also engaging persons with disability at all levels in the trainings, in the implementation. So that will create that kind of impact, like why we are talking. And data protection is also very important. It's not collecting the data for sake of data, but we need strategically why we are using it, how we are using. For example, in the disaster response, mostly people are not evacuated or rescued just because unavailability of the data. But in other regions like facing gender-based violence against women and girls with disability, the data is the problem that is there and it's very open. So how we could save spaces and the data protection as well, and engaging those people who are living with the disabilities so they can brief all the policymakers, the legislators, the government to include that.
Yeah, I think you've highlighted some strong challenges. So I wanted to ask finally, you've been fighting for disability rights for almost 3 decades. Are you hopeful for the future or pessimistic?
Yeah, I think Pact for the Future is a real hope for all of us. Like after the 2030 agenda, we have the way forward to go together. And I think with FCGO and engagement, this will give us a lot of hope that this agenda needs to be included. And especially for women and girls with disability, we really need to think how we're, and with the Equal World campaign, we said like it's all the intersectionality and the collective collaboration, and that give the vision that in after the 2030 we will be able to achieve the disability rights, so women with disability can live with dignity.
On that note, then, thank you, Abia Akram, for joining me on this episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Our next conversation was with Datuk Dr. Adiba Radzi from Malaysia. Thank you for joining me.
Yes.
So, you've had a long career in terms of disability advocacy and campaigning. How did this career and this journey start for you?
Well, it really started as a deeply personal journey because I was not born disabled. I became disabled after a few accidents and mishaps. I became disabled, an SEI, spinal cord injured paraplegic, in 2002. So when I faced my own challenges, I quickly learned that individual resilience alone wasn't enough to get through life. I realized I was constantly hitting brick walls, not because I wasn't trying, but because the system wasn't designed for me. That made me realize a fundamental truth, which is advocacy isn't just a hobby or a passion project. It really is an absolute survival tool for millions of Malaysians. My move from personal struggle to collective advocacy was natural, though far from easy, I can tell you that, because I didn't have a job for 6 years and I was living on eating rice and salt and drinking tap water for 6 years, so it was pretty tough. And it began with the realization that I needed to fight not just for myself, but for everyone facing the same brick walls that I was going through.
Yeah, in terms of those brick walls as well, you've paid particular attention to how infrastructure can be inaccessible for people with disabilities. What are some of the ways that public life can be inaccessible for disabled persons?
When we talk about accessibility, we must all move beyond the tokenistic ramp at the front of a building. I see inaccessibility in 3 distinct layers. First, the physical layer, which is our public transport, remains a massive hurdle. We have, MRTs and LRT stations that still sometimes they lack functioning elevators, or elevators which breaks down constantly. We have tactile paving for the blind that is left unfinished or leads them straight into a pillar. And it's not funny for some people. Maybe they think, we just placed it there. But then if you want to place it there, you must use the correct one and follow through. And for God's sake, get someone who's visually impaired or blind to test it. Secondly, there is the digital layer. In 2026, so much of our life really is online, yet many government websites and banking apps are completely unusable for screen readers used by the blind community. And it's really, really tough because I often get calls from some of my friends who have problem using the internet, using all the softwares, and trying to log in and log out and trying to read, and they get really, really frustrated because they feel that it's just double standard because people just forget them. And then thirdly, and perhaps most invisible, is the attitudinal barrier, people's attitude towards us. That is when business owners refuse to sometimes serve persons with disabilities. It has happened to me at this time of age. Or when able-bodied members of the public, they deliberately block accessible parking spots. That really kills public life for us. It takes a lot for us to get up, dress up, and show up. And then when we come out, when we want to go to the ramps, people put their motorcycles and motorbikes there, or they put their, they have stalls, and they place it up there. And I'm like, why do you even do it? And even sometimes back to, parking spaces, they park at our parking spaces because they say that it's convenient. Convenient for who? For you? What about for me? That's my right. So we must reframe this. Accessibility is a human basic right. It's not a charitable favor we grant disabled people. So it's not easy, it's frustrating, but I have to say that, if we don't voice out and keep on reminding people, I tell them not to be angry, because there is no point getting angry, because when you do that, people are going to retaliate. So the best thing is actually create awareness via media, via social media, and then talk about it all the time, not keep quiet. My friends would tell me, I don't want to go out anymore, because when I go out, this is what happens. I get really frustrated, and I say, if you don't show up, people don't know what you need. People don't see the frustrations that you go through. So you really need to get up, dress up, and show up, so that they understand why it is like that. And in the Senate, I would tell my other senators, I would say, eventually every one of us in this room will be disabled. And they look at me and they're like, what'd you say that? And I say it because it's reality. I mean, we come to the time where sometimes our hearing is not as sharp as before. We're not able to see as how we'd like to, as how we were when we were younger. And maybe we have problems with our knees or other health issues. So yeah, it's really a teamwork. Everybody needs to come out. Persons with disability needs to show up, and people around us need to realize that this is not just for me, but it's actually for everyone across the board.
Sticking with your time in the Senate then, and I think using this useful framing of the three different layers of disability rights, what role does legislation play in enabling accessibility and participation for those with disabilities?
Legislation is our bedrock. We must be honest about its limits, though. We have the Persons with Disabilities Act 2008, or Akta OKU 2008 in Malay, and it is a good start. But the harsh reality is that having a law is vastly different from enforcing one. Talk is cheap. There is a massive gap, really, between what is written on paper and what happens on the ground. We need to push our local laws to align strictly with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD. More critically, we need to give these laws some teeth. It has to have power. You must be able to do something about it. We need mandatory accessibility standards embedded directly into the Uniform Building Bylaws, and we need strict penalties for developers who design inaccessible buildings before they're even approved for construction. Rights without legal remedies are just ink on paper. I can tell you, I've met many architects who have shared with me their frustrations because they've designed the buildings to follow the universal standard, and then they go back to the owners of the building and they say, this is what should be done. And they're like, oh, no need to do. We don't want to spend so much. Let's just reduce it. We want to cut costs. Without realizing that when the building is open to the masses, to everyone, then they realize that there's no ramp. There's, they don't have parking spaces. And even if they make ramps, sometimes I go up the ramp, I come down, I'm dead, I'll fall, I'll get badly injured. So, and then they realize that when they do it after that, it costs triple. So really we need to educate and have people realize that it is very, very important. In 2030, just sharing with you, Malaysia will be an aging population, an aging nation. And it's just a couple of years, 4 years down the road, and if we're not ready for it, I really can't imagine how that's going to end up.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting issue that you were speaking about in terms of, say, disability as a characteristic is something that can and usually will happen to anyone in their lifetime. And around the Commonwealth, we see this same kind of demographic pattern in terms of aging societies and of increasing life rates. So in terms of then looking at that gap between legislation and giving that legislation teeth, what advice would you give to parliamentarians, either in your own jurisdiction or around the Commonwealth, trying to pass those kind of laws to institutionalize disability rights?
My first piece of advice is the golden rule of our movement: nothing about us without us. Never write a bill or policy for persons with disabilities without inviting us to the drafting table. I give an example. Sometimes when people have meetings, they have able-bodied in there, but they're discussing about me. Heck, I mean, what do you know about us? Oh, all right, you read about us, you see us, but do you know the struggles that we go through? It's best for us to be part of it. You don't have to have many people. You can have one of us in the team so that we can share and make things much easier for everyone. So, secondly, I tell my colleagues, walk a mile in our shoes, really. I challenge any MPs to use a wheelchair to try and get into their own office in Parliament. If the country, in the cities are accessible, try going to the outskirts, and put on a blindfold and try to navigate the Parliamentary website. Tell you, it's not going to be easy. Experience is the greatest teacher. And if you don't know, you don't care. If you don't make an effort, forever you are just going to say, I know, you guys are going through this. But do you really? So finally, and this is crucial, disability rights must never be politicized. It is not a Malay issue, a Chinese issue, or an Indian issue, or the land people issue. It is a Malaysian issue, and as a Commonwealth country, it's an issue that all of us must do and work on together. It's a teamwork. So my advice is to make disability legislation bipartisan, non-partisan crown jewel of national unity. That's the way to go.
Yeah, I think that's a useful idea as well, of nothing about us without us.
Without us.
Yeah. So how do you, in your advocacy and campaigning, bring those communities along with you when you're fighting with them?
Well, this is the most important lesson I've learned. My role is not to speak for the disabled community. My role is to amplify them. We must move away from a savior complex to ensure I'm bringing them along. I advocate for structural inclusion. We must together establish advisory councils where grassroots disabled leaders, not politicians, hold the pen on policies affecting their lives. Furthermore, I insist on radical transparency. I use my social media, my town halls, and my media background to report back to the community. If a bill I'm fighting for fails, I owe it to them to explain why it failed. Decisions must never be made behind closed doors. Never.
Yeah, you mentioned your media experience just there as well. You have served as a news anchor and since 2020 as the chairman of the National News Agency of Malaysia. Has your approach to campaigning for persons with disabilities changed between your media work and your political work? And what kind of lessons do you bring from it?
Well, I have been very blessed to be able to be in the media fraternity and then being the chair of the National News Agency, Bernama. Very, very blessed. It worked really, really well because when I was there, I made sure that all the news productions, all the news broadcasts had a sign language interpreter. And then I made sure that in Parliament, when we go on air live, we actually have a sign language interpreter for English and Malay. The language that we use is Bahasa Malaysia, which is the Malay language, but we also have English. So we always make sure that our interpreters are actually bilingual. So the tools have been incredibly complementary. My years in media really taught me the power of storytelling, and I learned how to make dry, complicated policy documents human and relatable. You have to do that. It can't be serious all the time. You have to put soul into it and storytelling so that people empathize and people understand more, and feel it. And I know the power of a 3-minute news segment to change the hearts and minds of millions overnight. So those, being in the media since 1986 really, really helped. Hence, my role in politics taught me about systems and levers, how to take that public sympathy and turn it into enforceable statutes and actual budget allocations. I use them synergistically. Media exposes the problem, politics fixes it. In my current role, I use my media background to market good government policies to the public. And I use my political platform to ensure those policies actually pass. Like I said, it's very important when we want to get things done. You have to make sure that you be diplomatic about things and not just get angry and rant and be frustrated, because it's not going to work. So you use your media. Media wants to know the story. You tell them the story as is, and then you work around it, and then you work together with back in Parliament so that it can help people from the grassroots up.
You've also founded the advocacy group OKU Sentral. Could you introduce this organization to our listeners and just speak a bit about some of the work that you carry out through this organization?
OKU Sentral is more than just an NGO. It's a movement, really. Everyone who are disabled in this country are members of OKU Sentral automatically when they have the Persons with Disability card or OKU card. We are a grassroots hub focused on empowerment, legal aid, and societal education. Our scope of work really is threefold. One is which is policy advocacy, where we draft memorandums and submit them directly to ministries. Two, direct services, helping individuals get their OKU identification card, assist them applying for government grants and navigating bureaucracies, getting jobs, and being their voice, really. Three, breaking stereotypes, where we run public awareness seminars in schools and corporate offices to change public's perception towards PWDs. And when we do that, we actually encourage companies, the board, even from the top to the bottom to up, to join us and have them understand what are the struggles of a persons with disabilities. OKU Sentral supports persons with disability with 7 different categories in the country: physical, blind, deaf, mute, and then the ones on the spectrum, mental, and others. Others also include friends of ours who are actually going through maybe double disability, and also for them who have rare diseases. So as for our approach, we do not use shouting matches, as I mentioned. Our activism is based on facts, data, and sustained pressure. We work quietly but relentlessly. OKU Sentral serves as my ears on the ground, really. Friends on the ground are the ones who give us feedback on what's going on. And then from there, I pick it up and I share it with the people at the top and the different departments to see how best we can support one another. And OKU Sentral, so we are not just for the OKU, not just for the PWDs, but also for the families and the parents and the carers, the caregivers, because we feel that especially post-pandemic, a lot of us have fallen in between the cracks. So we are there not to just look after the PWDs, but also their loved ones, because they are the ones that's going through a tough time. So they are our ears on the ground. It's how I know exactly, that's how we know exactly what's going on in every state across Malaysia, and also our federal municipalities, and also our 3 of our other municipalities of the federal.
Great. My final question then, so you've been fighting for disability rights for almost 3 decades now. Are you, at this moment in time, hopeful for the future or pessimistic?
I am a very positive person, but I'm cautiously hopeful. Absolutely never a pessimist. Pessimism to me is a luxury I cannot afford. When I'm fighting for the rights of 1 in 5 Malaysians, we have 34 million right now, so we support persons with disabilities close to 5 million in the country. So why am I hopeful, you might ask? Well, the younger generation, the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha, they're growing up with a much more inclusive mindset. They're fighting alongside us. Technology is it's so rapidly lowering barriers. Artificial intelligence, text-to-speech software, and smart devices are providing new freedoms. But we must make sure that we support everyone, not just in the cities, but also in the rural areas, not the urban, but also in the outskirts, because not everyone is tech savvy. Not everyone has an iPhone or the latest cells. So we must make sure that we use all kinds of platforms to reach out and give information so that we don't leave anyone behind, as you mentioned earlier. So this fight really is a marathon. It's not a sprint, a marathon. 26 miles. Every accessible MRT station, we force them to build. Every sign language interpreter we get onto national television, and every accessible parking spot we protect from abuse is a hard-won victory. 3 decades into this fight, I can see the foundation being laid for a truly inclusive Malaysia. We are building the future, one small victory at a time, one step at a time, slowly but surely.
Senator Adiba Radzi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. God bless.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth. If you want to stay up to date with the CPA's work, then you can find us on cpahq.org or on various social media, including X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram.